Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. I'm Andrea Sankey in Paris. Tonight, a new leader for Labour. Despite the grave unpopularity of British Prime Minister Gordon Brown, very little has been said about who might assume his post at the top of the UK's leading left-wing party. But a recent cover story of the British political magazine The Spectator claims to know who can save the Labour Party from itself. Not quite a household name yet, James Purnell is currently the British Work and Pensions Secretary. And at 38 years old, at least one prominent publication has, some say surprisingly, tipped him to be the next Labour Party leader. James Purnell, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi.
First, I have to ask you what you think is the state of the Labour Party. Why is it said to be on the brink of disaster?
Well, we've had some bad local election results recently, and we're at a stage in the economic cycle where clearly people are quite worried about their economic future. So people were saying to us that they were worried about, I guess, both the short term and prices in the same way there are in many parts of the world. But I think also people want to know what's the future of the economy. You know, how is Britain going to be successful in a globalised world? And they're looking to politicians to give them confidence about that.
Can the Labour Party, or is the Labour Party recovering? Because it seems it's been a long time that Labour has been struggling.
Well, you know, politics after 10 years is different from when you start. But I guess the big thing that I would say we have in our favour is actually in terms of policies and the ideology of British politics, things are going in our direction. The Conservative Party is coming onto our territory. So we feel like we have been winning the battle of ideas. We need to convince people that we are still the right party to take people forward into a new term and into the sort of new challenges that they are worried about.
You're feeling like you're winning the battle of ideas, but the bottom line is you're losing in parliamentary elections, and Boris Johnson just winning the mayor's office in London.
Sure, I mean, you have a similar thing here in France. You know, you have a socialist at the mairie in Paris and a UMP president. So, you know, in a devolved system, these things happen. You know, we're not minimising the election results that we just had. On the other hand, governments do go, you know, up and down in midterms. The key thing is who's got the right ideas for the next election, and that's our challenge.
Let me ask you, how did Labour get from the glory of a young Tony Blair who seemed unstoppable in the mid-90s to about 2003 to where it's at today? I mean, Labour's ratings are as low as they were when Margaret Thatcher was elected. And let's be honest, more than a few people have said it was Blair's relationship with the United States in the lead up to the Iraq War and his relationship with George W. Bush that marked the beginning of the end for Labour.
Well, clearly the war in Iraq was a difficult issue for our party. But actually in domestic politics, that really has never been the dominating factor in the way that I think people see it from the outside. I mean, the issues have always been jobs, public services, crime, immigration. At the last election, you know, despite the war in Iraq and the strong feelings that people had about that, we had a majority of over 60, which is a very comfortable majority by UK standards. So, you know, all governments go through difficulties. We'd never won 2 terms in a row as the Labour Party, let alone 3. So I would say in its historical perspective, you know, politically it's been quite a successful project. We now need to convince people it's the right way to go forward for the next term as well.
So you underplay the importance of foreign policy for the British public and what it comes down to in whom they elect. But still, do you think it was a mistake for Tony Blair to ally himself so closely and ally Labour so closely with the United States under a very unpopular regime there?
No, I mean, you know, Tony Blair always believed that the special relationship with America was an important part of British foreign policy, and it helped us to make Europe work as well. And his argument was always that actually if Britain could be a bridge between America and Europe, along with other governments having relations with America, that made both of us stronger. And, you know, clearly people have had strong feelings about that relationship over the last few years. But actually just stepping back from it, we have far more in common with America than divides us. You know, Europe and America are in very similar places on democracy, on their view of markets, on their view of personal freedom. And actually, when we work together, we are a force for good in the world.
Let's talk about you then. What was your response personally to the Spectator article that says you are the best hope Labour has for avoiding disaster?
Embarrassment mainly, and befuddlement, because there's no such question at the moment.
Why so? You don't think, I mean, I'll bring you an interesting statistic. Ladbrokes, the betting, gambling outfit, has you down as second to David Miliband, Foreign Secretary, to succeed Gordon Brown.
Well, betting companies and newspapers like all this stuff, and it helps them sell products. But there's no such question, because I do believe that Gordon Brown is the right person to be taking the government forward and the Labour Party forward. So it's not a question that arises at the moment.
Then why is there this undercurrent in the parliamentary Labour Party that wants him out before the next election?
Well, actually, if we go back and look at the Tories in the 90s and 80s, they were completely riven by division. They were completely divided on Europe. Actually, the Labour Party is a united party. We're going through, as I say, some sort of bumpier political times. But we think the right thing to do is talk about ideas, talk about policies, and then it'll be up to the voters to decide, and not magazines.
Not magazines and the press. Would you like to succeed Gordon Brown?
There's no such question, because Gordon Brown is a good Prime Minister in my view.
Okay, but he can't last forever. Would you like to take the leadership position?
We have a very good question in Britain, which is you don't answer hypothetical questions. I'm really focused on my job.
I've heard you answer that before. Quickly, then, let's talk about why you're here in Paris. You've met with your French counterpart, Xavier Bertrand, for talks, and though I got to say it sounds like nothing really groundbreaking has happened, it does seem to be an indication that France is looking toward Britain to provide a model of sorts for pension structure and reform. Is that true?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that we're looking towards each other, and France and Britain actually, although we've always had, sporting rivalry, and there's always been, issues between some of our, popular press, actually there's huge amounts more in common than separates us. We're both nuclear powers, we're both on the Security Council in the United Nations, we both have big and successful economies, colonial pasts, and actually when Britain and France can work together, as well as working with other partners like Germany, we make Europe work more effectively. So, this is all part of following on from President Sarkozy's visit to the UK, making sure that we can have good and effective relationships to make Europe work well, because we believe in a strong and effective Europe.
The issue at hand, though, is pension reform right now in France, and it's very appropriate that you're here on the day of a major public transport and postal workers strike over pensions. What do you think France needs to do? And do you think the French, you've lived in both countries, by the way, you did most of your studies here in France, at least until the age of 14. Do you think the French actually work hard enough?
I can't really comment on France itself, but in the UK, with the process that we went through was effectively seeing whether there were any easy choices, and there aren't any easy choices. We set up an independent commission that said, look, one option we're not prepared to have is pensioners being poor in retirement. So then there's only three options. We can work longer, we can save more, or we can pay more taxes. And actually what they concluded is we had to do a bit of all three of those to be able to have the kind of system in retirement that we wanted. Given how many more people there will be who will be living longer, you have to have a reform to make sure that the system is both sort of fiscally sustainable, but also has the right levels of support for people.
Is the Sarkozy government doing what it needs to do?
As I said, I can't comment on the Sarkozy government itself.
Well, you've been an observer of its policies.
Yes, and if they came to the UK and were talking to a British interviewer, they would say exactly the same thing, which is, governments don't comment on each other's policies. Clearly, there's a lot that we can learn from each other, and the whole issue of working longer is something which all countries are going to have to face. We've gone from a situation where, at the moment, we've got sort of 4 people working for every one retired to one where it will be 2 for every one person who's retired in a few decades. And there's no way of avoiding the fact you have to make certain trade-offs if you are going to have a system that is sustainable and fair at the same time.
And that's the question. Is the welfare system, the pension system, the welfare state of France and Britain, is it sustainable, considering the demographics that you've mentioned?
I think so. And I think the key thing, one thing which is quite important, which we've certainly failed to explain well as a British Labour government, is the amount of increase in social protection that we've done in the UK in the last few years. We've brought in a minimum wage. We have a tax credit system to increase people's wages if they're low paid, on a mission to abolish child poverty. And in pensions, we're trying to have the same move towards social protection. We're trying to bring about equality between men and women in pensions. We're trying to make sure that pensions go up faster. And The way that we've tried to do that is by not being shy about reform. So by having reform as a way of bringing about better social protection. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in pensions.
Okay, best of luck with that then. James Purnell, thank you so
very
much for joining us on this edition of The Interview. Thanks to our viewers for tuning in as well. That is all for tonight. Another edition tomorrow. Do join us then. Bonsoir.